Imagine you step into an elevator in a brand new building. The elevator can go down as many floors as it wants, but it can never go above the 5th floor, even if the building has 10 floors. No matter how strong demand is, no matter how many people are waiting to go higher, the elevator just stops at 5. That's a price ceiling. And in housing markets, that's rent control. Developers hate this capped profit because when your maximum reward is limited, even though your risk isn't, you start thinking twice before you invest. That is a tension that I call the rent control paradox. Welcome, I'm Daria, your host. Today I'm going to talk to you about price ceilings and the problems they create for future tenants and construction projects. And a price ceiling is basically just a legal maximum price. In housing, that means that the government limits how much landlords can charge in rent. At first glance, that sounds helpful. Lower rents means more affordability. However, basic economics will tell us something else. When you artificially lower rent, this means more people want apartments. However, at the same time, the supply of those apartments has not changed. Too many people chasing too few units, and fewer constructions wants to supply it at a lower price. In short, more demand, less supply. That's how shortages begin.
So rent control creates shortages right away?
Thanks for your question, co-host. In the short run, yes, especially if demand continues to stay strong and higher than that is available. But the real issue isn't just today's shortages. It's the long-run construction problem. An economist named Avinash Dixit once asked a simple question. If you cap prices, when would anyone build? Building houses isn't like selling coffee. It's irreversible. Once you pour that concrete, you can't unpour it. Once you build, you're stuck. Because construction is irreversible, developers think in terms of expected returns. That just means, will this project be worth it in the future? Imagine you're offered a job where your salary can never exceed $50,000. No matter how well you perform, you will still have to work 80 hours a week and face layoffs. You'll probably hesitate before taking that job. That's what rent control feels like to a developer. On the other hand, if rent can rise when demand increases, there's potential upside. That upside compensates for that risk. But if rent is capped, that upside is limited. The downside risk, such as construction costs, maintenance, and other uncertainties, can still exist. So what happens? The developers wait.
Wait for what?
For conditions to be so good that even with a cap, the project feels safe. And sometimes that worth it threshold is so high that the building simply doesn't happen. That's the paradox. The rent control protects current renters, but it may hurt future renters. Because by reducing incentives to build new apartments, the total housing supply shrinks. Fewer new buildings mean tighter markets. Tighter markets mean longer waitlists for apartments, reduced mobility, and sometimes declining property quality. The policy meant to improve affordability can unintentionally reduce availability. Now, this isn't a simple good versus bad story. Rent control exists because housing is essential. Cities want stability. They want to prevent displacement. But every policy involves trade-offs. Short-term availability versus long-term supply. Protection for current tenants versus incentives for future construction. When you cap the elevator, you protect the people on that floor. However, you may discourage anyone from building the next place. And that's the rent control paradox. Thanks for listening. Bye there.